You don't necessarily know exactly where someone is. We do our best to try to get all our ducks in a row before the complaint has been filed so that we have some sort of reasonable expectation as to where they might be. But if they're not there, then you're kind of back to the drawing board.
The Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry, with your host, Adam Friedman.
Today we're going to be covering Pennsylvania foreclosure and service of process. Now, Pennsylvania is one state where service of process becomes a little bit more complicated than others, and we're joined by Friedman Vartolo Associate Tim Cirino to help us walk through the details. All right, Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Tim, just to jump in, why is service of process a special topic in Pennsylvania?
I would say because it's a little more difficult than some of the surrounding states, from my experience.
Okay, and we're serving twice, right?
Yes, you're serving the complaint, and then after you've entered judgment, you have to personally serve again the notice of sale, along with some additional things that need to be done.
In most states, even if you are serving twice, you're using your vendor, and most of the work is telling the vendor, meaning the process server, what to do. What happens in Pennsylvania?
So in Pennsylvania, you have 67 different counties. So each county kind of operates a little differently. In a majority of them, the sheriff does the service of process for you. However, that's not the case across the board. For example, in Philadelphia, we need to use our private process servers to do service, and the sheriff really isn't involved.
Just to highlight that a little bit, there's a lot of counties in Pennsylvania, and you're also not in control of your vendor. Adding on top of that, the fact that you're serving twice definitely adds a couple different weird variables there. Would you prefer to be serving through a sheriff or through your vendor?
Philadelphia is the main county that we use a vendor for. If I had a choice, I'd use our preferred vendor to do it because we know how reliable they are. The issue with service in Pennsylvania when you're relying on the sheriffs is that in most cases, you have about 30 days to serve the complaint. And in some counties, they're not super efficient. And you'll encounter a situation where you'll get everything to the sheriff when you're supposed to, and they simply will let the time expire and you won't get service of the complaint within that first 30 days, in which case you'll have to start over again.
This is a unique topic or situation because you have basically two types of methods of getting this done. You either have a sheriff or a government entity that's going to handle service, or you have a private vendor that's there to make a profit. And the rules of capitalism would dictate that when you have a vendor who's motivated by profit and growing their business versus one that, I'm not going to call it a monopoly because it's not. There's one show in town and you got to use the sheriff. I'd be interested to hear the rationale between why you must use a sheriff all the time, because I think things would probably be a lot more effective across the state if you could always use your own vendor. Are there any other difficult or interesting nuances to PA service you think we should highlight?
So I kind of alluded to that earlier, but there are what I would refer to as like reinstatement periods. This applies only to the complaint. But for the complaint, you essentially, if you have an in-state defendant, after you file the complaint, you have 30 days to serve the complaint on the defendant if they're in state. If they're out of state, you have 90 days. If that time period expires, you have to file what's called a precipice to reinstate, which will then start the clock back at zero. In most cases, you can get it done within 30 days, but when you have multiple defendants, sometimes it gets more difficult, and then it's kind of this game of trying to ensure that you're fitting your service within those windows.
It could be hard to find someone within 30 days. Obviously, in most situations, it's doable. But where it's not, you're just continually filing that precipice to reinstate the complaint.
Yeah, certainly, because you don't necessarily know exactly where someone is. We do our best to try to get all our ducks in a row before the complaint has been filed so that we have some sort of reasonable expectation as to where they might be. But if they're not there, then you're kind of back to the drawing board.
So let's say I serve somebody the complaint and I serve them personally, no problems. And now a few months go by or a year goes by, whatever it is, and now I'm at sale. Can I just serve that individual via mail? Like, we know their address now.
Unfortunately, no. That's the kind of difficult aspect about service in Pennsylvania that, to my knowledge, is fairly unique to at least Pennsylvania, is that once you've entered judgment, in order to give proper notice of sale, you need to serve them personally. Regardless of if you've gotten service of them personally with the complaint and every other pleading has been provided to them by the mail, you're then required to serve them personally again.
Certainly when you compare Pennsylvania to other states like New York, some of the litigation concerns or some of the statute of limitations concerns that you have in New York are very different in Pennsylvania, at least in most of the state. But I do think the service issues and the service requirements are very unique to the state and are one of the more complicated aspects of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate it, Tim. This is definitely a topic that comes up a lot with our clients and just in the industry in general. So I appreciate you shedding some light on how it all works within Pennsylvania.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Thanks for joining Tim Cirino and I on the Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry. Thanks for tuning in and looking forward to seeing you next time.